What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for the Farmers Insurance Open. We've got ourselves Torrey Pines, one of the more beautiful venues around the world, let alone what we're privileged to see on the PGA Tour schedule, and gonna bring you all the research you need to make your top picks and, of course, select some of your top plays for DFS. We'll go through a specific breakdown of each venue. There's actually two for this week, the North and the South course, the South of which is the main course that we'll see for 3 out of the 4 rounds. And then we'll go through a hole-by-hole analysis of the South course, some of my key stats for analysis that I'm using to identify my top plays of the week. And then we'll wrap it up with a few of the comp courses, a few similar tracks that we see on the PGA Tour schedule that you can use for some of your correlation analysis. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get this thing rocking. Lots to talk about. So like I mentioned in the intro, a 2-course setup. You've got the North and the South course, and players are going to get a crack at both of them before the weekend. So unlike last week, there is just a 36-hole cut, no 54-hole madness like we saw there at the Amex. And last year's champion was Luke List, somebody that we actually ended up hitting outright. Hit him at about 150 to 1. He was touted on the channel, talked him up in our core picks video, mentioned that I was going to bet him outright, and you probably should too. And one of, if not the biggest numbers I've really hit as in terms of an outright, at least here on the channel. Beforehand I hit a couple 200 to 1s back in the day, 250 to 1 back in 2016, but nothing like that since, at least, published here on the channel. So definitely one of our bigger hits here, and a track that is all about ball striking. I mean, at least the South course, the one that we're going to see for 3 out of the 4 rounds, is almost 7,700 yards. It's one of the longer courses that you see on tour. Actually, it's a little bit over 7,700 yards, nearly 7,800 yards. And you're going to see that premium on those elite level ball strikers. So no surprise that a Luke List one around the green play is also an important attribute around that South course, which all of that we'll talk about extensively later on. But there's going to be a little bit of a wrinkle this year that's going to even more so make that the case. So if you thought last year's Luke List winning was a sign of ball strikers galore here at Torrey Pines, just wait until the thing that we bring up here in a second is introduced into the mix. But a few other past champions past Luke List include a Patrick Reed, a Mark Leishman, Justin Rose, Jason Day. So a lot of those old-time players like a Rose, J Day that used to be #1 in the world. You have John Rahm, Brant Snedeker. So a wide variety of skill sets. You have your short game specialist like a Patrick Reed, short game putting specialist like a Brant Snedeker, John Rahm, who of course also won the US Open around this track, who's the best ball striker that we've seen probably over the last 5 years. Jason Day, Mark Leishman, J Day, more of a ball striking specialist. Leishman, another one of those short game sort of players. But the one common denominator is stout around the green play. I mean, even John Rahm, we know that when he's playing his best golf, he's going to be gaining around the green. And the rest of those champions there, including a Luke List from last year, are borderline, if not elite level around the green, getting up and down sort of guys. So we'll talk about that when we mention the South course. They have extremely small greens around Torrey Pines. It's a long course. It's got lush rough. It's going to play even longer this year. So you're definitely looking for guys that not only can keep themselves in position, but when they get out of position around this tough track, which is a muni, it's something to mention about Torrey, is anyone can go out there and play this course, but don't confuse that for ease of access or simplicity. This course gives even these tour players plenty of headaches, but that's going to be even more the case this year. Like I said, it's going to play longer, and let me just let the director of agronomy at Torrey Pines let you know the reason why. So, and I quote, this is on the GCSAA report, which of course is always in the description of this video. So check it out if you want to see the exact quote. But he says, following the holiday season, frequent rain events have hit the property, said Devin Cullen, director of agronomy, on January 9th. We have seen years with precipitation totals much higher than what you've seen, but it is the frequency and consistency that the storms have hit that has given the property little time to dry down. With a few rain events still projected between now and the tournament, I'm expecting the course to play longer and thicker than it already does. Should be fun. So Per the agronomy director, they've gotten a lot of rain. There hasn't been much time for it to dry out, and I have checked over the last 2 weeks, that rain has continued. That was forecasted when they came out with this quote on January 9th, and that has also been the case ever since then over the last 2 weeks. So you should be looking at a course with lush rough. It's listed at 3.5 inches right now. It should be relatively damp, which means that players aren't going to be getting much run on their drives, which that 7,700 yard distance, a little bit over that, is going to play to perhaps even like 79 or even 8,000 yards. This course favors the bombers. If you look at any sort of correlation, some of the winners, we've seen shorter hitters like a Snedeker have success, but those are some of the outliers out there. The leaderboards, particularly the top 5 and top 10 at the Farmers Insurance Open over the years, has been dominated by players that are relatively long off the tee. So if it's going to play even longer, you would expect that effect to be even more so the case here in the 2023 version, and with even more emphasis on that distance if the rough is going to be even more penal as well. But just getting into some of the specifics of the South Course, par 72, designed by the Bell Brothers in 1957, 7,765 yards long, and it played over par last year. It played to a scoring average of .35 shots over par, with a cut line of -3 over the first 2 days. So keeping in mind that the -3 cut line does include the players that were over there playing on the North Course. So though the South Course played a little bit over par, when we get to the North Course here in just a little bit, that course ended up playing under par. The greens at the South Course are 5,000 square foot per green, putting them on the shorter, or should say smaller side of things when it comes to the tour average. They are a POA Anua surface, and the GIR percentage for those small greens was just 65.1% there in 2022, which 65.1% is actually a little bit higher than you would expect for just 5,000 square foot greens, and it's similar to what you saw last week at the Stadium Course, a course that had right around 4,800 square foot greens. So another track with small targets where the green regulation percentage was actually a little bit higher than you might expect. There's a few other small green courses like a Pebble Beach, for example, where the GIR percentage isn't nearly as high as what you see at these two events. So a lot of the around the green difficulty is probably due to that. They try to keep the greens here relatively receptive, because when you miss the greens around the South Course, you're in a heap of trouble. There's a ton of undulation on these greens. They tend to run fast. They're tiered on almost every single case. Even the North Course, which we'll get to here in a second, that plays significantly easier than the South Course. The greens are among the most tricky that you have on tour. So around the green is important because of how small these greens are. And even though the GIR percentage isn't that low compared to the PGA Tour average there at right around 65%, it does, impact you every time that you are missing these greens. The fairway percentage, they are a little bit lower than average at just 58.8%, and a lot of that has to do with the width of the fairways. They are just 24 to 27 yards wide for an average of 27.3 yards, and the reason why it's a little bit higher there in terms of your average are holes 4 and 13 that have extremely wide fairways. One of them is 35 yards wide, one of them is 43 yards wide. So those kind of skew the average a little bit, but outside of 4 and 13, you're looking at stripes. 24, 25 yard wide fairways aren't all that easy to hit. And given that we have 3.5-inch ryegrass rough this week, that's the overseed that you see around this track this time of year, you're not going to want to miss these fairways. And with some of that water that's come through, that overseed is growing in lush. I mean, you've seen that. The agronomy director tried to make that as clear as possible with his quote there on January 9th. So that 3.5-inch rough is going to play even more penal than usual. Last year, the missed fairway penalty was just .34 shots, which is actually right about the PGA Tour average, but they didn't have the same sort of weather coming in. So that should be much higher here this year. And it's also worth considering that there's not much water off the tee around Torrey Pines. So the missed fairway penalty is almost entirely down to the rough length, right? There's no penalty shots being added onto that average there. So definitely some gnarly rough that you don't want to get into. And it is a rye overseed on top of some kikuya, which kikuya, it's dormant this time of year. It's not going to be as sticky as it would be if it was playing during the summer, which you see for the US Open around here. That's something worth noting, is that this course plays as a par 72 for the Farmers. During the US Open, it plays as a par 71, and they play it at a different time of the year. And when they're playing it, that Kikuya isn't dormant. It tends to be a lot stickier. So the rough will be right about the same length as what they have right now, but it plays significantly more difficult on that time of year than it does right now because you're hitting out of ryegrass as opposed to that really sticky Kikuya. So that's why the missed fairway penalty was just 0.34 shots last year, but probably should be a little bit more significant this time around just because of some of that recent weather. Taking a look at the North Course now, so the easier of the two, this will only be in play for one round. So in terms of the modeling, not nearly as important. In fact, I'm kind of hardly considering it this week. It's more of just a variance round than anything, at least for 4-round contests, betting outright, that sort of thing. It's only 7,258 yards. It's another Bell Brothers design from 1957 and plays well under par. The greens are still relatively small. They're right around 6,000 square foot, so just slightly under the PGA Tour average when it comes to their size. It's much shorter. You've got tight fairways, just like you have at the South Course, that are between 24 and 27 yards wide, and the same sort of gnarly rough. So rather than as much of an off-the-tee test, it's more about just getting yourself in play, hitting those fairways, and then hitting solid iron shots. The greens are a little bit easier to read, so they're a little bit larger, but they have slightly less undulation than what you have at the South Course, which is going to help with your made putt percentages. It's going to help with your 2-putt percentages, getting up and down, all that sort of stuff. So the North Course, not that important from the modeling perspective, but important for making it to the weekend because the South Course is playing over par. Last year, the cut line at this event was 3 under. You've got to take this North Course to 3-4 under, right? At the very least. If you can go out there, shoot someone like 6-7 under par, you're going to feel really comfortable about making it to the weekend. If you only shoot someone like 1 to 2 under par, well, that means you're going to have to go and scratch out an under par round at the South Course, which always isn't a given. I mean, you can go and take that course low, but you've got to be perfect off the tee. You've got to be hitting almost every single green because, like I said, when you get out of position there, you are going to feel it, whether it's off the tee in that gnarly rough or around the green where you have some of the more difficult shots to get up and down on the entire PGA Tour. It is truly a ball striker's haven. And now let's go hole by hole and show you exactly why a lot of the ball strikers tend to succeed around Torrey Pines. All right, now let's take this hole by hole to give you a taste of what these players are going to be facing. Hole number 1, a 451-yard par 4. Not nearly the handshake that these guys would be hoping for. You've got sand bunkers on both the left and the right side of the fairway. 2, a well-protected green. You have a front, little false front there to worry about. The sand bunker to the left and the right side of the green. And overall, you're just hoping to get out of here with a par and kind of just get settled into your round because you're going to be taking body blows all day. And believe it or not, one of the easier holes on property is going to be hole number 2. Just 392 yards. No need to hit anything more than a 3-wood off the tee. Have someone like a pitching wedge, 9-iron into the green. And one of the few birdie looks that you're going to have all day. So take advantage of them because you're going to get a taste real quick of what to expect with hole number 3. A downhill par 3. It's about 10 yards downhill. Plays into the breeze most of the time because of the winds coming off of the ocean there, and a really, really difficult approach shot to judge. You're dealing with the downhill aspect, the into the wind aspect. Most of the time, you're going to have to flight your golf ball down to get any sort of consistency on your distance control. So, yeah, just a difficult hole. You're hoping to get by with a par there. Hole 4, one of the more iconic tee shots, one of the more iconic views in all of golf. You have, of course, the cliffs to the left side here, there with Torrey Beach down there, and a 489-yard par 4. You're going to be dealing with right about 190, 200 yards into the green. This little bunker in front is extremely annoying. All of the slope here is going to funnel you into that bunker. And if you're dealing with a back left pin or even, a middle right pin over here that you'll see from time to time, and it's an extremely difficult bunker shot to get close. It's another one of the greens where you have a tiered aspect to it. The backside a lot taller, a little bit elevated compared to the rest of the surface. So just a very difficult hole. The views are going to kind of entrance you in, but don't sleep because, you could very well double bogey or even triple bogey and eject at that hole. Hole 5 is 457. Believe it or not, one of the easier holes you're going to find on property, but just like a lot of the greens, you're going to see almost every green around the south course has bunkering both to the left and the right side of the surface. A lot of the fairways have the same sort of, bunkering to them. You'll see that huge cavernous bunker to the left and the right side, which really puts a premium on accuracy. If you're missing into these bunkers, you're going to have, a much more difficult look into the green, whether it's both from the view standpoint, where a lot of these deep fairway bunkers obstruct your view, or of course just from trying to control your spin. You may get a ball that zips out of these bunkers. You might get that dead-handed shot that runs out of these bunkers. Whereas if you're an elite level driver, you can keep it in the short stuff. 150 yards from the fairway here isn't all that much of a problem. So you're starting to see that reliance on the off the tee play, on these par fives. Off the tee play, of course, is going to be extremely helpful. This one's only 562 yards, so even some of the shorter hitters on tour should at the very least be taking a crack at this in two. You will see a stray eagle from time to time, but a relatively small surface, it's kind of hard to hit in two. Most players are just going to get it up their green side and try and get out of there with a birdie. Another example there of why around the green play is important. I mean, we have the difficult tee shots, the small surfaces to begin with, but a lot of your scoring on the par fives also comes down to around the green. Hole 7 is 465, another par 4. You don't have the bunkering down the right, so the smart miss here is to stray to the right side of the fairway. You don't want to block yourself out with that tree right there, but most players should be able to hoist the ball over it. You're pretty run-of-the-mill average, slightly doglegging left to right par 4. Hole 8 is 177. This time, rather than bunkering to the left and the right side of the green, you have a bunker in front and behind the green here, and it's kind of squeezed in there. You can see it's kind of like a square-shaped green. You can see it's not very deep, right? It's a lot wider than it is deep there, and that's why they have the bunkering in front and behind, right? They're trying to pinch that in there. They're trying to make this all about distance control and a slightly uphill shot that's hard to judge. Hole 9 is 617 yards. It is directly straight, and if anything, I think it makes it more difficult here. It plays relatively flat. You have the bunkering to the left and the right side of the landing area off the tee, and unless you're one of the longer players on tour, you're not even going to get this near the green. In fact, most players are going to lay up in front of this fairway bunker, because if you do decide to go for it and you end up hitting it in this fairway, you're looking at that 50 to 60 yardage, which is extremely awkward for these tour pros, and probably looking at a par at that point rather than the birdie that you're really hoping for going into 9. Hole 10, so if you're starting on the back, I believe they may have for the first 2 days players starting off of holes number 1 and 10. Over the weekend, I wouldn't imagine, unless they have to, they're going to have guys going off of hole 10. If you do start on hole 10, it's a little bit more of a handshake than hole number 1. The reason I say that is the tee shot requires a little bit less precision. The longer players on tour can take this left fairway bunker out of play with a driver. Then you kind of just don't have to worry about the left side, right? You just have to avoid that fairway bunker to the right. Even if you decide to lay back with something like a 3-wood off the tee, you have 160 yards into the green in a much larger surface than hole number 1. So if I had to choose between hole number 1 and hole number 10 on what to start on, it would be hole number 10, no doubt. Hole 11 is 225. One of the smaller green surfaces on property, so the fact that it's a 225-yard approach shot does make this an especially difficult hole. Another one with quite a bit of undulation to it, different tiers on it, like almost every single surface around Torrey Pines, and because of its proximity to the beach over here, you also tend to get relatively high winds, so just a difficult tee shot, a difficult hole in general, like pretty much every single par 3 around Torrey. Hole 12 is 506 yards. It is a par 4, an absolute beast. You have the sand bunkers to the left and the right side of the fairway, and one of the larger greens though. So I will say, though it is an extremely long par 4, Torrey at the very least, the designers here, the Bell brothers, made sure to make the surface a little bit larger to account for that, to collect some of those long iron shots that with a smaller surface would probably be bounding off the surface if they come in a little bit too hot. Just a par hole, right? You're hoping to get by with the par. Hole 13 is 624 yards, another par 5 that you're not really going to reach into unless you're one of the longer players on tour. A difficult tee shot in terms of angle. If we go back to the tee box, you'll see It's a little bit angled from off the tee, so hitting the short stuff here becomes a little bit more difficult. Even the layup shot is difficult. You can see the landing area down here is only right about like 15 to 16 yards wide. So you're going to see a lot of people that are laying up into the rough here, and that rough that's 3.5 inches long, that ryegrass overseed, makes this an especially difficult shot to gauge the distance on. So just another difficult hole. If you can get a birdie, great, but you're going to see a lot of pars around 13. Hole 14 is only 437. This is another one of the few birdie looks that you're going to have. I mean, if you get it in the fairway, you're going to have a wedge into the green. You're going to see a lot of missed fairways here to the left. To the right side is the bailout area, which of course that ryegrass rough significantly increases the difficulty of the shot. Just another example of why shots gained off the tee is not only important to keep yourself in play, but also to take advantage of the scoreable holes. Hole 15 is 518 yards. It's another extremely long par 4, a relatively large surface. You can see the super long par 4s do play, to larger surfaces to account for that, but still just an absolute brute out there. Hole 16, another brute. 228 out there, plays slightly downhill. The par 3s here, I have to say, they have extremely long iron shots into them, and they still have the relatively small surface going on. So just another hole that you're hoping to make a par on. 17 is 443. You have the bunkering down the right side. You have this cliff on the left, so players are going to avoid the left like the plague. You're going to see a ton of shots just bailing out into the bunkers on the right, which, given how steep some of the bunkers over here are, given some of the side hill lies that you'll get in the bunkers around Torrey Pines, doesn't make for the easiest shot to get onto the green, because it is, relatively, I'd say, just narrow green. It's not very deep right there, making that difficult. And finally, hole 18 is a par 5, so you end on arguably the most scoreable hole on property, but also very much so a risk-reward prospect. Your shot into the green here is 250, sometimes like closer to 240 yards, 235 for some of the longer hitters on tour, over a lake. And on Sunday, the pin location is going to be on the front left over here, almost impossible to access. Moving day will be like on the front right over here, which is a little bit more accessible because you can lay up to the right side and you have a relatively easy up and down. But that water over here, it doesn't seem like it would always be in play. I mean, you can probably imagine, if you're hitting 3 woods into this green, how many end up in that lake. But it's truly like there's a magnet in there. You're going to see more water balls on this hole specifically than you're going to see on, I don't want to say any other hole in the PGA Tour, because I know off the top of my head there's at least 4 or 5 that have more water balls. But under crunch time, I don't know if you're going to see more water balls than you're going to see here on hole number 18. So a fitting end to this event, to this golf course in general. And as you can see, guys, Torrey Pines, especially the South Course, can be an absolute brute. All right, now that we've seen the South Course, let's go through my key metrics for analysis this week, which again are heavily focused on the South Course because we're seeing it for 3 out of the 4 rounds, but they do include a full look at the event in general. So, that 1 round there on the North Course is, slightly considered when it comes to these. So keep that in mind. A huge emphasis there on the South. First off, we've got shots gained off the tee, where we're going to be looking at distance over accuracy here. As you can tell, relatively long course, so the longer hitters are always going to have the advantage, but even more so when you have really tight fairways too, when they're only about 24 to 27 yards wide. Even some of the more accurate players on the PGA Tour are going to have trouble hitting the short grass. That's why you saw right around a 58.8% average last year when it came to your fairway percentage, and that includes the intermediate cut. That's from the Data Golf average, which is right around, usually, it depends event to event, usually like 3 to 4% higher than the actual fairway percentage. So you're going to see a lot of players hitting out of the rough, having to deal with that 3.5-inch ryegrass overseed, which is supposed to be even gnarlier this time around. So that distance is becoming a little bit more important than the accuracy, when a majority of the field is going to be hitting out of the rough anyways. If you're an elite level accuracy guy, you can really keep it out of the long rough out there. Sure, that's an advantage, but I'm not sure there's going to be many people in the field that are really getting it done that way. Next up, you've got shots gained on approach. It's pretty flat distribution when it comes to the buckets here. So unlike some of the events we've seen of late, where the shorter ranges, that wedge range from 50 to 125 was a lot more important than most weeks, This week it's flat. The only real outlier would be the 250 plus range, where a lot of those iron shots on the par fives are coming from. Some of those par threes, I mean, 3 out of the 4 of them are from that 200 plus yard range. So that's something to take a look at there as well, is that 250 yard plus bucket. But outside of that, we know that we have small greens here. There's a huge penalty for missing the greens, as I talked about before, with the undulation you have here at Torrey Pines South. So, the difficulty in getting up and down, is elevated. So the importance of actually hitting the greens is elevated as well. So that's why it's there at number 2. Typically there at number 1, but as you could tell by going hole by hole and with some of the weather they've had, which is only going to make this course even juicier than what we've seen, that's why off the tee is number 1, right? It's gone from number 2 to number 1 because of that little bump there. At number 3, we've got shots gained around the green, which is a significantly underrated stat here. Going through those past champions before, just to remind you guys, they're all elite level guys around the green. I mean, even Luke List, a significant gainer around the green, but a Patrick Reed, arguably the best around the green player in the world. He's at least up there in the top 3 with like a Spieth and JT. I guess depending on the golf shot, you might want to select one guy or the other, but all 3 pretty much interchangeable in that argument. You have Mark Leishman, great short game. Justin Rose, I mean, we know that guy is one of the short game legends out there. Jason Day, also in that conversation for one of the best short games of all time. John Rahm, he's got a pretty decent short game. He got it done with the ball striking, right? So I guess he's just okay with the around the green play. And then Brandt Snedeker, right? Another world-class around the green player. So don't discount that, right? It's going to be a lot more about ball striking this time around because of that gnarly rough, because of how long the course is going to play. But around the green has always been important, especially for winning here around Torrey Pines. So definitely something that I'm not discounting there. In terms of some of the other key stats, if you're going to look at putting on POA. But last year, we went after Luke List because we know that putting is de-emphasized around Torrey Pines. So it's in the model, but it's not super important for me. If anything, again, I'm looking at the POA numbers. Par 5 scoring I'm looking at. If you're going to get anything done here at Torrey Pines, a lot of those birdies are going to come on the par 5s. I'm looking at shots gained approach out of the rough. With hard to hit fairways, a lot more of those approach shots are coming out of the rough. So trying to narrow down on that. Opportunities gained, always important from a fantasy perspective. So for DFS, an even more important stat. Ball striking form, so looking at players on approach and off the tee over the last 16 rounds, birdie or better percentage, and then long par 3 scoring, that would be 200 plus yard par 3s, which you have for 3 out of the 4 holes, and then long par 4 scoring, so that's the 400 to 500 yard par 5s, and then anything over 500 yards as well I'm looking at. You have a huge distribution of those long par 3s, those long par 4s. I could look at long par 5s too, but there's just not a huge sample size on tour, right? There's not a ton of 600 plus yard par 5s. So I'm just looking at regular par 5 scoring there. But overall, we know what we're looking for. We're looking for ball strikers that can keep the ball in play. If they're solid putters on POA, not Bermuda. I almost said Bermuda there. We've had a bunch of events with Bermuda going on, but a good putter on POA, that's a little bit of an added bonus there. But really all about the ball striking, keeping yourself in play. And par is a pretty solid score around Torrey Pines. And now for the comp courses, the tracks around the PGA Tour that should play similar to what we're going to get here for the Farmers. At number 1, we've got Quail Hollow Club, another long course, tricky around the green. It's got some gnarly rough up there in I guess it's North Carolina. It's pretty close to South Carolina. They're on the border. But overall, difficult track. You see the longer hitters have a lot of success at Quail Hollow. You see a lot of good iron players have success and a little bit of a de-emphasis on putting. Last year at Quail Hollow is how I really got on Luke List, because Luke List didn't win at Quail Hollow. He did get in contention there just before going to the Farmers Insurance Open, and boy oh boy did that end up paying off. So a lot of correlation between winners at Quail Hollow and then what you've seen here at Torrey Pines, so not a huge surprise there. There's this link between Quail Hollow and then what you have here at Torrey Pines has been discussed over the past few years here in fantasy circles, so it's not like it's anything new here. Just want to remind everyone that is a great comp and something that I've really been able to take advantage of over the last few years. Number 2, you have Congaree Golf Club. So this is a little bit of a new one, so something that I just picked up on this year. Congaree is a long course. It's 7,600 yards, actually a little bit longer than that, but really tricky around the green. So when you miss around Congaree, the agronomy is different. It's a Bermuda course out there. Went to that event this year for the CJ Cup, also played for the Palmetto Championship. different scenario because it's more of like the Australian sandbelt style, where around the green, it's not tricky because of the rough, because of the undulation on the greens. It's more the sandy, like 14, 15s on the stimp meter that you were getting at Congaree. So it put an emphasis on hitting the greens so you didn't have to deal with those sort of around the green shots. You also had a distance, a huge factor, a huge asset around that course because it was playing so long. So though it plays way different, right, from the aesthetic standpoint, looks completely different than what you're going to get this week. A lot of the skill set is the same when it comes to finding success at both of the venues, which is why I love it as a comp. And the stats back that up. If you look on Data Golf, look at some of the correlations. Quail Hollow is still number one when it comes to that category, but Congaree kind of sneakily going up that list. And I think, all of those reasons are, why that's happening. At number 3, we have Accordia Golf near Chino. That's the home of the Zozo Championship. That's where Hideki ended up winning. This year ended up being Keegan Bradley winning over the last 2 years, and that's a ball striking fest. That's a very difficult course off the tee. Not super long, but still on the longer end of the spectrum. And around the green, it's been compared to Augusta National, the Masters out there. So another course when you're missing, you're getting out of position, you're going to be penalized heavily, and that's the reason why you've seen a lot of the correlation there as well. So if you go on Data Golf, that's also up there in the top 5 when it comes to correlated courses. So not a surprise that I have it there in the top 3. A few other courses you could consider would be Winged Foot Golf Club, home of the U.S. Open when Bryson won. Country Club of Jackson, which is a tour stop there for the fall swing. A relatively long course there in Jackson. That's Bermuda, so different agronomy, but similar skill set when it comes to success. TPC Harding Park, the home of the PGA Championship when Colin Morikawa ended up winning. Caves Valley Golf Club, the home of the BMW 2 years ago, so not last year, but the year before that. That was when Bryson and Cantlay ended up having that duel out there. If you can't tell, Bryson, right, has a lot to do with these courses, right? There's a reason why he's had success at some of these longer courses, and he keeps popping back up. When it comes to either the champions or guys that were having success at them. And then Corrales Golf Club, another extremely long course. This one plays a little bit easier, but another tricky around the green course that's like 7,700 yards long. So again, that driving distance aspect is really where a lot of this correlation comes in and where you see a lot of the overlap when it comes to the leaderboards there. All right, fellas, that is all we've got for this week's course breakdown. Before you hopping out of here, go ahead and comment down below what you've got the winning score at. I mean, for me, I'm going to take 14 under, slightly more difficult than we saw last year with Willie Z and, of course, Luke List getting to 15 under. But that rough, a little bit more gnarly, going to play a little bit longer this time around. So though we have slightly more receptive greens, I expect some of the players to have a little bit more trouble off the tee. So, yeah, like I said, I'll go with 14 under par. But let me know your comments down below there. Go ahead and comment. And also, go ahead and smash that like button before you hop on out of here. I appreciate all the support. You guys stopping by, consuming the content, helping me grow my brand out here on YouTube and Twitter. I really appreciate all of it. So best of luck out there, guys. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared for picking some of your outright bets, for going out there, selecting some of your plays for DFS. That's the goal with these videos, right? Bring you all the research that you need in a condensed fashion so you can go out there, be as efficient as possible with your time, and hopefully go out there and cash out for the fantasy side. So looking forward to this week. We've got a stellar field, a golf course that, anytime it's a major championship caliber level golf course, I'm going to be excited to see these players tackling it. So looking forward to it, guys. Best of luck. I'll catch you guys next time, and we'll have our core picks video dropping a little bit later on this evening. We'll have a value picks video dropping for this event as well. Remember the early start. It'll be starting on Wednesday as opposed to Thursday this time around, in hopes of trying to avoid conflicts with football there on Sunday. So content going to be coming out hopefully a little bit sooner than usual for you guys. So looking forward to it. Make sure you hit that like button again, subscribe so you don't miss any of that content when it drops, and I'll catch you guys next time.